I have to begin with a correction. 2 weeks ago came word that Eva Longoria, the actress, had left the United States because of the Trump election. She was living in Mexico and Europe, commuting between the two. And it became a big national news story. It was all over. CNN ran a story on it. Multiple news outlets ran a story on it. But Eva Navarro, or Anna Navarro, is a friend of Eva Longoria's. And Anna Navarro, I know they're good friends. And Anna says it's not true. She was already living in Mexico. She's been living there for 3 years. It's not true. It appears, however, to be true that Ellen DeGeneres has left the country with Portia de Rossi. That they've moved to England. They've moved to England. Now, I got to say, though, there's a difference, I think, between actresses in Hollywood who are moving overseas because in their bubble, they believe the world has come to an end, because in the Hollywood bubble, you believe all sorts of bizarre things. And in the Hollywood bubble, everyone is convinced Donald Trump is the second coming of Hitler and the like. But it's different between them and a reporter. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution has begun to run an occasional series exploring people's decisions to leave the United States. And they have decided to start with Todd Kopilowitz. I don't know how you quite pronounce his last name, Todd Kopilowitz something. He describes himself as a marketing consultant, but not just any marketing consultant. He's a former reporter and columnist for the Dallas Morning News. And I want you to just listen to some of this. Growing up in the Midwest, I couldn't fathom how a nation could embrace someone like Hitler, or how America justified locking up 120,000 Japanese Americans in detention camps. I was raised to believe most people had a breaking point, a moral red line that once crossed would stop them. Now I know better. Fear, weaponized, simple scapegoats offered. The toxic cocktail blinds people. It happened in Germany, Bosnia, Myanmar, Cambodia, Stalin's Russia. Less than a month ago, my heart dropped like a lead weight. The nightmare came home. Fury and fear have been spinning in my head ever since. Donald Trump will soon be president again, this time with a MAGA-led Republican Congress and a rubber-stamped Supreme Court ready to greenlight whatever hateful agenda he couldn't finish the first time. He's armed and ready to bulldoze decency. For a horrified number of Americans, the misogyny, racism, and anti-Semitism didn't matter, or worse, they liked it. That's not just alarming, it's sickening. We're not in Kansas anymore. This is Nazi Germany territory. Wow. Wow. In our house, we've seen too much of the inhumanity humans are capable of. My wife spent years in combat zones as a TV photojournalist and video editor. And 2020, as journalists in the United States were beaten on live TV during the George Floyd protests, it was like a portal opening to her past. It wasn't the Trump administration, by the way, beating the journalists. More than anything, it was the protesters themselves attacking journalists. This is remarkable. This is remarkable. He spent a decade as a crime reporter and a decade helping the Marine Corps recruit young men and women. And yet he looks on the country and he doesn't recognize it. He was a reporter, but these are people poisoned by their own prejudices. And I need you to understand that. This guy views himself as the righteous one when he's actually the bad guy. Yes, he actually is the bad guy. He views his fellow Americans as dumb. He views his fellow Americans as willing to support an authoritarian. He truly believed democracy is under attack, as opposed to it's just another election. And by the way, Donald Trump, his first 2 years in office, also had a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a conservative Supreme Court. And it was a pretty, when you get right down to it, normal Republican administration. If anything, Donald Trump this time has more progressives in his cabinet than he had last time. He's picked a guy who worked for George Soros. He's picked a woman who supports the Democrats' unionization beliefs, supports amnesty, and opposes school choice. Donald Trump's got a Democrat for Secretary of Health and Human Services, and his team just blocked one of the most pro-life professionals in the country from being in HHS. He's picked a celebrity doctor who supports gender transitions to be in charge of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. And you think that he's going to be some sort of Hitler come to town? This is the problem with these people. They believe their own BS. And it gets to the problem with reporters generally. Reporters are some of the most arrogant and lazy people. You talk to people in politics, you talk to people in the Jews generally, and what comes about largely when you get to these levels is you're being spoon-fed stories. They lack intellectual curiosity. This guy lacks intellectual curiosity. He doesn't want to know why people might have voted for Trump, nor does he want to understand how his own Supreme Court could block him. They don't want to do any of that. He just wants to believe his own prejudice. And his own prejudice is this: Americans are bad. It's why these Hollywood libs can leave the country. They don't like the United States. They don't like you and me. They live their cloistered existence in Hollywood, the left coast. And now suddenly they can't understand how anyone could have voted for Donald Trump. They really do believe. I bet this guy really does believe that everybody's economy is just fine. I bet this guy really believes all of the bad things. And in fact, he does. We're watching the fabric of our society, our culture get shredded in front of us. In Texas, they offer bounties for turning in women seeking abortions. That's not actually true. Across red states, cruelty is being legislated with zeal, banning water breaks for road crews, criminalizing compassion, targeting LGBTQ plus people as public enemies. Decency is a crime. Hate is a virtue. This is not my America. Now, what is this? Last year, Texas nabbed headlines for legislation that eliminated heat-related employer rules across municipalities, including rules mandating water breaks for outdoor workers in industries like construction. Dubbed the Death Star bill by critics, it led to a legal battle, but ultimately went into effect, meaning employers cannot be required to provide workers with outdoor water breaks or time in the shade to avoid potential heat-related illnesses. What exactly was this about? See, he's believing the worst, and you yourselves are probably duped. So what is this? Texas signed a law. It would eliminate mandatory water breaks for state construction workers. Why? Because in Austin, Texas, and Dallas, the progressives decided that every 10 minutes, every 4 hours, construction workers have to take a break. And what happened is it drove up compliance costs for the state. This doesn't apply to the private sector. It applies to local governments that were trying to exert themselves over state control. Now, obviously, if a worker needs water, they can take water. There's no problem. And this is part of the opposite concern, that this guy doesn't want to see, this guy doesn't want to hear, this guy doesn't want to understand. That these local governments decided to mandate every 4 hours, You got to have a 10-minute break. What the construction teams say is that obviously if a worker is thirsty, the worker can get water. But mandating every 4 hours, all work has to come to a stop for 10 minutes is inefficient because not every worker needs to stop every 4 hours for 10 minutes, that they should be able to stop as need be. And this only applies to state workers, and this is local governments slowing down construction development and making it one size fits all in a way they didn't need it. But this guy has internalized this, that this is some sort of abomination. No one banned water breaks for road crews, and that's what he writes. It's not actually true. No one banned water breaks. What they banned was shutting all work down for 10 minutes every 4 hours, which is ultimately what it amounted to. But he believes it, and you're not going to challenge him on it because he's convinced of his own righteousness, and that's the problem with progressives. You know, I can't separate my worldview from this. I believe there's a heaven and a hell and a God, and I'm supposed to be humble. I don't get everything right. These guys are convinced they get it all right, and you yourselves are the bad people. Neighbors are turning on neighbors, he writes. Cultural differences are being criminalized. Children are weaponized as pawns in deportation schemes. We're teetering on the edge of a free fall into rock bottom, pulling anyone with a shred of decency down with us. I'm glad this guy is leaving. Ironically, he's going to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is a place where if you stand outside and preach the gospel, you might wind up in jail. Northern Ireland is also a place where if you say that men cannot become women or you say something critical on social media of the government, they can show up at your doorstep and arrest you. But he believes that's better than here. Because what this guy ultimately doesn't want is you. He's not really concerned about Donald Trump. He's concerned about you. He's decided he's superior. And that is the common theme of all these people fleeing the country, is they've decided that they're smarter than you. And they shouldn't have to put up with democracy. They shouldn't have to put up with your vote. They preach democracy all they want. But when they don't get their way, they take their football and flee. And I hope that he will make it a permanent stay and not just for the next 4 years. Because people like that are why so many Americans revolted and decided to stand with Donald Trump. They don't like these preachy progressives who insist that they're right and you're wrong and they win and you lose every time. His disgust with what happened is the same disgust we should hold for a man like that.